Hi YouTube, it's me Danny again. So I want to say about 2 years ago, before I started on this quest or journey on alternative medicine, inspired by a doctor who had gone away to China and India to learn a little more about alternative medicine according to Eastern values and principles. Um, you know, right to the meat and gist of things, what he was kind of dancing around at the time before, after delivering about an hour of speeches and how Western medicine is based off of the wrong principles or inadequate principles or understanding of diseases in general. He finally, towards the very end of the seminar, he gave up the secret as to why most diseases are the way they are in conjunction with oxygen. Okay, so just keep in mind that's the gist of what we're talking about today. And at that time, I was well aware of the patterns that existed in the field of medicine. Some of the things that worked and some of the things that were consistently appearing in the bulk of the medicine that the pharmaceutical industry have been supplying or providing or prescribing us. And what I noticed was that, consistent to what the doctor had said at the time, was that it is true that oxygen was the primary agent behind all the remedies that Western medicines and pharmaceutical industry has been providing. And the interesting thing there was that, you know, a lot of my friends in general, they constantly would tell me about friends of theirs or cousins, relatives, or aunts who's always been plagued with, diseases, STDs, whether or not they're cancers or tumors, and other, heart-related problems or whatnot. But a lot of the times, you feel as though you're helpless. You stand there and not be able to do anything, and hear their mentionings of how much it would cost for them to reverse such a condition. So I decided to experiment on one of my good friend's mother, who's also a friend of mine, who believed a lot of the stuff I talked about when I first presented to her this idea of alternative medicine. And she had always been, an astute studier of alternative medicine with respect to the herbals that she was brought up on, which dated back to Vietnam and her understanding of herbal medicines in general. And she was very open-minded to something like that, so it wasn't really hard to convince her. But at the time of the diagnosis that I had, conducted on her, I want to say I have it written and logged right here. This was on April 2nd, 2009, at approximately 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I recorded her with a manometer, which registered a systolic rate of about 164 and a diastolic of about 84 and a pulse per minute of about 64 beats per minute. Okay, I went out and bought one of those blood measurement devices, and I did this because I was very intrigued of the sciences, and I really wanted to discover for myself the understanding of blood pressure as related to the field of water pressure studies that I have been, previously involved in. And I wanted to see what the similarities are in terms of a pressure environment and, routing water versus routing electricity versus routing gases. So to me, the circulatory system in our body must behave in a very similar manner. Um, you know, Outside of some of the other dimensions that um, blood carries, which other fields of study like the pressures in gas, where gravity has more of a significance in affecting the resultant outcome. But in blood, the idea, the principles behind that is very much the same, and they follow the same law of motion. So I figured that I'd be able to deduce, a method that it's a little more natural in helping her, not curing her, but in helping her. So the first month, what I did was that I had prescribed her hydrogen peroxide, which I had at that time determined or concluded that it could be just condensed oxygen, which I'd coined liquid oxygen. And I try not to tell people that they're hydrogen peroxide. If I do, I'll make sure that they're fully aware that it's the hydrogen peroxide at 35% that you use to cleanse out your fruits and to keep them fresh, so that the bacteria won't, invade, propagate around these fruits, so as to discharge the fruit's natural biospheric energy. And so that's what I did. I had prescribed her that in very low doses of about 1% to 3%, and and I had her continually ingest this over a period of about, I want to say, 3 times a day for about 25 days. And at the end of that 25-day trial, if used accordingly and correctly, a month later, when I had gone back to follow up with the sphygmomanometer, I noticed that her systolic rate is now down to 153, 84, and 61, which is a slight improvement. But from the 5 days from that point, I went back to register her pressure reading again, and now the systolic rate's down to 130, 68, and 71 pulse per minute. Okay. Now, at the end of that first month and 5 days of trials, from April 2nd to May 7th, 2009, what her account and her testimony was that her heart was no longer behaving the way that she had complained about before, prior to visiting her doctor, who said that it would cost her 80 grand to fix. And she said that the strangest thing was that her diabetes went away. Right? So her heart condition improved drastically, significantly, and her diabetes, and this was the indication that she had shown me, was that the ball of her heel was no longer kind of scaly. They weren't repelling, or they weren't coming off at the rate that they were coming off before. And what she tells me is that this is a form of diabetes, or an indication of diabetes. And what I realize is that if we were to consume the food that our system, or our societies is providing us, the majority of us will have diabetes, and these diabetes will definitely surface during our elderly era. So we've got to make sure that we're well aware that a lot of the food that we're taking in is causing a corrosion to our bodies. And what we can do is be very preventative by understanding oxygen. And I'm going to give you a couple of more clues as to why I had concluded to the way that I did. And my deduction came from the pattern that I realized that all diseases were really bacterially based. They're based on bacterial invasion, okay? And what oxygen does is oxygen kills bacteria. That's easy enough. And the testing you can conduct is just to provide any bacteria, on a petri dish with a highly induced oxygenated environment, and the bacteria will not propagate. As a matter of fact, if you were to pour, liquid oxygen, a very light dose of that, onto the bacteria, they will die. They'll decompose and die. Okay. The other thing I noticed is that oxygen removes oily substances really well. Sticky residues, oil, and it almost repels it right off the bat on first application. And it kind of tells me that, oil, sticky stuff, bacteria, similar along the same lines, okay? Now, oxygen repels that almost immediately, okay? Now, oxygen removes oil, and you could also test that, which led me to deduce that oxygen really, when ingested in low doses, unclogs the arteries, and your other blood vessels, okay? And that explains why her circulatory system had improved drastically, and it explains why her diabetes problems had gone away. And this explains exactly why she feels a lot lighter on her feet, no longer any chest pains, and she'd gone on today to trusting and believing in this idea of oxygen. Okay. What she also did was that she ate more fruits, which carries a lot of oxygen in them, and also she spent a little more time walking around near plants, parks, etc., just to consume a little more oxygen around those environment. And I hope this research helped for you guys. And if you have any parents, families, cousins, or whatnot that are plagued with that idea of tumors or cancers, make sure you get them to wrap their minds around the idea of oxygen. And thank you, and God bless. And I hope you pass this message on by going down and clicking on that 5-star. Just as much as you can, please pass the message on. Thank you. Bye-bye.